Good evening, everybody. My name is Ahmed Daoud Atik. I'm your host for the night. Welcome to another Dialogue Matters event for the Dialogue Institute of the Southwest, the Austin chapter. I have with me our distinguished guest and speaker, Professor Stephen Collis. And before I introduce him further, I want to talk to you all about the Dialogue Institute and what we do. I'm a volunteer at the Institute. And just real short, the Dialogue Institute envisions a society where every person views and treats each other with dignity. People come around shared values to promote common good in their communities as well as the world as a whole. And in that vision, we serve to promote mutual understanding, respect, and cooperation among people of diverse faiths and cultures by creating these type of opportunities for them to come together, have direct communication, and have meaningful shared experiences. So the Dialogue Matters event we have tonight is one of those meaningful shared experiences, one of those events where we have direct communication. And it is based on the idea that we all need to learn from each other. We all need to sit down and just listen to one another. And that matters. So these type of events we have with Dialogue Matters is a series. We feature inspiring speakers and experts on various topics ranging from rituals in a particular faith to how to maintain our relations in the digital age. And today's topic is freedom for all, fundamentals of religious liberty, one of the founding principles of our country. And we have one of the foremost speakers on that topic here with us, Professor Stephen Collis, who is a faculty at the University of Texas at Austin Law School. And he is actually the founding faculty director of both the First Amendment Center there and the Law and Religion Clinic. And he's a very distinguished speaker, has a very decorated career. And if I went through the whole list, it would probably take 5 minutes. But just some highlights. He has written extensively on this topic and has actually published his book called Deep Conviction, which brings to life the history of the free exercise of religion in the United States and how that law has developed and makes it accessible to lay audiences. Before coming to the UT, he was the Olin Darling Research Fellow in Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School. And earlier in his career, he was an equity partner at one of the biggest law firms in the country, Holland and Hart, where he chaired the firm's nationwide religious institutions and First Amendment practice group. And he was also a member in the complex civil litigation and employment practice groups. He graduated magna cum laude from University of Michigan Law School, where he was also elected to the Order of the Prof and served as an editor on the Michigan Law Review and the Michigan Journal of Race and Law. And his articles have been published on the Michigan Law Review, on the Nebraska Law Review, the University of Denver Law Review, and he has appeared in various media outlets. And without further ado, please welcome Professor Stephen Collis.
Well, thank you, Ahmed. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful for you and that kind introduction, and I'm especially thankful for the Dialogue Institute and what you're doing to promote dialogue among people from different backgrounds and faiths and experiences. It's something that I think we are seeing more and more is so crucial and crucially needed in our society today. So I'm grateful for you and what you're doing, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here.
We appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'd like to do is, there's an anecdote I often tell about myself. I don't know if it'll, if you'll find the humor in it, but I'll share it with you. I find that we often get into trouble when we are dealing with something and we don't understand it. And one story relates that I can relate to illustrate that point is when I was a 9-year-old boy, I was combing my hair in our family's bathroom. We had like one bathroom that everybody kind of used, and I was combing my hair and I was making it look really good, and I was very proud of myself. And I put the hairstyling mousse in my hair and I made it look good. And then as I walked out of the bathroom, my mom stopped me and she started to sniff the air, and she said, "What is that smell?" And I very proudly said, "It's the moose." And I pointed to my hair, and she panicked. Her eyes got real big, and she spun me around, and she ran me into the bathroom. She slammed my head into the sink, and she started washing my hair out. And it turns out that what I thought was hairstyling mousse was actually the hair removal product Nair. So all of my hair started to fall out over the next few days. That is my story of what happens, the mistakes that can be made when we're dealing with things that we don't understand. And unfortunately, religious freedom is one of those things that we too often don't understand. And so my hope tonight is so I can explain some of the fundamentals of it, help people understand it a little bit better, and then use some of the cases that we are working on in our law and religion clinic at the University of Texas to help people get a better sense of what religious freedom really is. So Ahmed, I'm going to share my screen. Could you give me a thumbs up if it once you see it? Is it coming through? Great, thank you. What I want to do is talk about the fundamentals of religious liberty in the United States and how they came to be, what the goals of religious freedom are, and then I'll give you some concrete examples of how some of these principles actually play out and are playing out right now for real world clients. Let me say first off, when the founders of the United States were putting together this country and trying to figure out how they were going to make it work, there was one problem they were very worried about. I mean, there were a lot of problems they were worried about, to be clear, but one of those problems was a significant one, which was religious warfare. They were coming off of centuries of religious warfare in Europe and religious warfare in other countries across the Atlantic. They were very concerned. There had even been religious warfare and skirmishes in the colonies. And so they were concerned about how can they create this new country in a way that is going to avoid the religious warfare that they had seen throughout history. And some of these wars were absolutely devastating in Europe, wiping out tens of millions of people. They had to figure out a way to solve the problem. There are some principles here that are important to note. First off, a lot of people think that the problem is actually religion, that religion leads to religious warfare. So you can see from this cartoon that being illustrated, right? You have war with his arm around religion saying, "Sigh, where would I be without you?" But it's not religion that results in warfare. It's actually something else. There's another problem going on here, and it's a complex problem. So let me try to flesh it out. First off, one important fact to realize is that all people have religious beliefs. Now, very religious people and even very people who consider themselves non-religious often bristle when I say that. But the reality is there are certain questions to which we all have answers. Is there a God? Is there more than one God? Is there a life after this one? Is there a life before this one? What happens to us when we die? Why are we on this earth? Is there a reason that we're on this earth? Whatever answers you come up to with those questions are religious answers. Even for atheists and agnostics, the answers are religious answers. And it's not those answers that lead to warfare, it's something else. But an important component to realize is that all people have religious beliefs. There's something else, though, that all people have and that all people experience. One thing that we have learned over time is that all people have a tendency to commit the Puritan mistake. If you're familiar at all with North American history, you know that the Puritans fled Europe and came to the shores of what is now Massachusetts, hoping for religious freedom. And that's true. We often say that the Puritans came for religious freedom. It's true they did, but the Puritans were concerned with religious freedom only for themselves. They didn't care about protecting anybody else. So when other people of other religious faiths came, the Puritans were not at all concerned about trying to ensure that those people could live according to their religions in peace and harmony. So we often refer to that as the Puritan mistake. Most people have the tendency to want to commit the Puritan mistake. They want to protect their own beliefs. They want to protect their own religious convictions. They don't want to protect the religious convictions of other people. They also have the tendency to want to use the power of government to force their beliefs on other people. Whatever they value most, they have the tendency to want to force that on others, even people who object to it and conscientiously object to it. That's all the Puritan mistake. So we have a world where everybody has religious beliefs. Almost everybody has the tendency to commit the Puritan mistake. And as we just saw today with the inauguration, power shifts. It's a pendulum going back and forth. And at some point, one group is in power, and at another point, a different group is in power. Well, as power shifts, if the legal regime allows people to commit the Puritan mistake, what you end up with is people constantly using government and fighting for control of government so that they can force their beliefs and views on others and oppress those people who disagree with them. If there's not some mechanism in place to prevent that, what you end up with is constant warfare to seize control of government and then to use that government to oppress those people you disagree with. That is what led to all of the warfare throughout history in Europe prior to the founding of the United States and in England, but also even today in many countries around the world. This is not an ancient problem. It is a human problem that it continues to ravage many nations today. This idea of wanting to use the power of government to oppress certain religions and to force other religions on the people. So the founders of the United States and all of the individual colonies, but then eventually for the entire country, had to figure out some kind of a solution. Each colony came up with their own variation of this, but the First Amendment to the federal Constitution, to the United States Constitution, captures the two main principles that really help bring this to life. There are two clauses in the federal Constitution, specifically that there's a third clause, but I want to address that tonight. The first two clauses are the ones that are really doing most of the work, and they capture these principles. The first clause is called the Establishment Clause, and it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So an establishment of religion is a state church. And the idea, what we get from this establishment clause is we know at a minimum there shouldn't be a state church, that there should be some separation between church and state. The second clause is called the Free Exercise Clause. That one reads, Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. So it's these two clauses together, the principles from them that help form religious freedom. We often refer to them as the first freedoms, not because they're any more important than other rights in the Constitution, but because this is literally the first clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. So here's how you can see how these clauses are playing out. The Free Exercise Clause limits how much government can burden religious exercise. The Establishment Clause limits how much government can favor one religion over another. And then there are laws preventing private discrimination. So this doesn't necessarily come straight from the Constitution, but we have passed laws saying that, say, a private employer can't reject someone for a job just because of their religion. You can't discriminate based on religion if you're a private actor. So these three pillars together create the religious freedom that we enjoy in the United States. By and large, at least for good chunks of our history, we have been able to avoid religious warfare and religious oppression because of these principles from the Constitution and this third pillar preventing private discrimination. In those instances in United States history where we have failed to apply these protections, we have actually seen warfare and bloodshed along religious lines. So the idea to remember here that's really important is, first of all, that with all of this working together, what it does is it creates an environment where everyone is on an equal playing field to teach one another, to persuade one another, to proselytize to one another, to convert one another, without the heavy hand of government getting involved. In this environment, what persuades people religiously is the power of a particular faith's doctrines. It's the example of the believers. It's the spirit people feel when they visit a particular church or synagogue or mosque or temple. That is what creates, that is religious freedom playing out. It's government not playing a role and all of us being left to teach and persuade and proselytize and convert on our own using the power of our religious teachings and our texts and our examples. In that environment, I hope you can see, religious freedom protects everyone. It protects the atheist. This picture here is of a man named Roy Torcaso, who was an atheist. It protected him when he was forced to try to sign a document saying he believed in God. It protects every religious group, agnostics, atheists, it doesn't matter, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, just go down the list. There are hundreds of religions in the United States. And the reality is, when it is working, it has allowed us in the United States, which is the most religiously diverse country in the world, to live alongside one another in peace, by and large. That's what religious freedom is doing. But I also understand that it's a little bit difficult to see how these things play out in real life. So what I'd like to do with some of my time here is give some examples of real cases happening right now, so you can see how some of these principles are actually playing out. One of the things I do as a law professor at the University of Texas is I run something called the Law and Religion Clinic. The Law and Religion Clinic is part of a bigger First Amendment center. But at the Law and Religion Clinic, we have law students who come in and they work on actual religious freedom cases representing real clients and real controversies that are happening live right now. And through that experience, the students get to learn about religious freedom, but they also get to help people in a number of very personal and very challenging situations, people and institutions. So let me just give you a few examples of the types of cases we're dealing with. It's not a coincidence that I have on this slide a picture of a prisoner behind bars, because that is often a place where religious freedom gets challenged. Let me just give a couple examples. We have one scenario where a man is in prison and he has certain clothing that he is required to wear by his religion. He's allowed to wear it by his religion, but the prison is refusing to allow him to wear it. The prison does not have legitimate safety concerns, but we often see this in prison, where prisons refuse to allow prisoners to exercise their religion. One thing we know is that prisoners give up a lot of rights. When people are convicted of a crime and they go to prison, they have to give up a lot of rights, but they don't give up all of their rights. And we also know that religion plays a very important role in helping many prisoners overcome the behaviors and the problems that led to them committing crimes in the first place. And so allowing them to practice their religion is an important part of what needs to happen in prisons. So when prisons prevent people from exercising their religion, in this case, from preventing this prisoner from being able to wear this sacred clothing, and they don't have a legitimate reason for it, then we come in and we represent prisoners in those circumstances. In another prison case, there is a sick prisoner who cannot cut his hair because of his religious beliefs, but the prison is making him and forcing him to cut his hair. So the prisoner is trying to challenge that rule and is trying to get the prison to allow him to continue to stay in prison without cutting his hair. This is something that the Federal Bureau of Prisons already does and many state prisons do, but some states are refusing to recognize this religious practice from sick prisoners. Another example, both of those, by the way, are examples of free exercise challenges to religious freedom. So the Free Exercise Clause limits how much government can burden religious exercise. If a prison burdens a prisoner's religious exercise, then the prison has to show that it has a compelling interest for doing so, and that it has taken the most narrow way possible to achieve that interest. So in many of these cases, what the prisons will argue is that, well, we have safety concerns. And if the prison can prove that it has legitimate safety concerns, then the prisoner will lose their case. So religious freedom is not absolute. The free exercise of religion is not absolute. But oftentimes the prisons have a very hard time showing that they actually have a compelling interest. Let me show you a couple more examples from the free exercise of religion. There is a church group in a city in Austin who wants to be able to help and serve the homeless. And they want to be able to use their church buildings to be able to help and serve the homeless. But the city in which they are housed is refusing to allow them to do that. So the city is burdening their free exercise of their religion. In the state of Texas, the government has to, again, prove that it can meet a compelling interest if it's going to do that. It has to show that it has a compelling interest. In this case, the particular city is probably worried mostly about the neighborhood surrounding these churches and what will happen if far too many homeless people end up coming and congregating around these churches. That's a legitimate concern, and the churches are then going to have to navigate that with the city and see what they can figure out. But religious freedom protects the churches to a degree here. Religious freedom allows the churches to make the argument that they should be able to do this and to work with the city to try to find a solution. What doesn't happen is the city just gets to come in and say, no, you can't do this, and that's the end of the conversation. Religious freedom allows the church to make its claim. In another instance and so I'll give you another instance. Well, let me switch over. I'll show you how some establishment clause issues work. There is a case in Oklahoma where a particular school district is having what it's called missionary time once a week. And the school is allowing missionaries from Christian churches to come in and essentially proselytize to students in a public school. I emphasize that it's a public school. So a public school is a government actor. Generally speaking, because of the establishment clause, schools cannot be used to allow one church to come in and proselytize to students. That is off limits under the establishment clause. So that is getting litigated right now. Let me show you an example from laws preventing private discrimination. We have a situation where a particular employee works in an environment where on a regular basis, people in that environment are saying derogatory things and words about his religious beliefs. And it happens on a daily basis. It happens by people doing it sometimes intentionally to upset him, and sometimes just because they're in the habit of saying it. There are laws that prevent creating what is called a hostile work environment for people just based on their religious beliefs. And those laws is something that this person can take advantage of to try to create an environment at work where all people's religious beliefs are protected. Another example on the side of the free exercise of religion. There is a situation happening, and I should emphasize, I have to talk about this in vague terms, because if I don't, I'd be revealing privileged attorney-client matters, and I can't do that. So I have to be a little bit vague about where I'm talking about it, which is why I can't mention a particular city or a particular church. But there is a church in another city in Texas that had saved for 10 years, had purchased some land, and had saved for 10 years to be able to build a building on this land. And that was their goal, was to finally build a church. And it's a historically Black church. And right at the last minute, at the 11th hour, as they were getting ready to build this church, the city where this church is housed came and said that they needed the land to build a fire station, and that they were going to use their power of eminent domain to take the land from the church, and then to make, and they would compensate the church. But this land is very sacred to this church, and it's very important to the church to be able to build its building there. As I said, they had been saving for a decade to be able to build this building. So the church can then bring a claim against the city, arguing that the city must show that it has a compelling interest for building this fire station right here, that it can't use any of the other land around it, that it couldn't go 2 blocks out of the city and build it in an open field there. Why the church has to adhere, why the city has to adhere, that's the argument that the church gets to make, and that'll get litigated out, and we'll see what happens. Another example is a the federal government has taken a position that certain universities in foreign countries, I have to be a little bit vague here, but that any Americans who travel to certain universities in other countries for religious training will then be in violation of a number of federal statutes and can be penalized criminally, could receive criminal punishments for going abroad to study at these universities for religious training to become religious teachers. So what that means is for the people of this particular faith, if they want to leave the United States to go to some of these places where it's the only place they can get the training they need, if they were to go, they could be criminally punished and even imprisoned and maybe even prevented from coming back to the United States. These are United States citizens going abroad to get the training they need and then coming back. That prevents them from exercising their religion. They're unable to go forth and engage in the very practices that are so critical to them so that they can then come back and teach to their flocks. So their free exercise of religion is being burdened. Under the law, again, the federal government must show that it has a compelling interest for preventing these people from going. In this case, the government would argue that it has a compelling interest because it thinks that there could be ties to terrorism. But it's not enough for the government just to say that. It actually has to prove it in a court of law, that it actually has evidence that there's a risk that people going abroad to study how to be religious ministers are actually potentially becoming terrorists rather than simply coming back and ministering to their flocks here at home. The last case I'll mention, and then I can move on, is it relates to what type of liability should churches face. So churches engage in all sorts of behavior, all sorts of religious practices that they get involved in across a broad spectrum of different faith backgrounds. And one question is, when can a church be held liable if somebody, say, gets hurt during a religious exercise? If a church is engaged in its free exercise of its religion, having, say, a particular ceremony, and let's say a baptism, and somebody slips and gets hurt where the baptism is occurring and there's water on the floor, how liable can the church be in that situation? What should the law say about how much money a church should have to pay if someone gets hurt in the middle of a religious exercise? That's another case that we are working on as a clinic and trying to help figure out what the law should be on. Those are just a few examples of the types of matters that we handle in our law and religion clinic. And I hope they give you just a taste of how religious liberty is playing out across the United States. My experience has been we generally only hear about religious freedom in the media when something in the culture wars comes up. You only hear about it on the most controversial cases. But 98% or more of the cases that are out there are the types of cases that I just listed. They involve religious minorities in most instances who are in an environment where people in government simply are not thinking of them, are not taking the time to figure out how to help them work through the problems. And so government is placing burdens on them and preventing them from being able to practice their religion. And in the United States, we generally have a rule that says if government is burdening someone's religion, it has to have a really good reason. And if it doesn't have a really good reason, then people get to continue to practice their religion. That has not always been the case in the United States. There have been periods of time when we have not had that rule. And during those periods of time, we have seen religious minorities in some instances get completely crushed. That was true with Latter-day Saints in the latter part of the 19th century. It's been true with a number of Native American faiths. It's been true with a number of atheists. It was true of a number of Buddhist groups early in the country. And it's even been true in the case of some smaller Christian groups who didn't have the political clout to fight back in a given community. So religious freedom allows all of us to live together in peace, and it keeps government out of it as much as possible. The only thing I'll emphasize is to say as much as possible. Government can always make the argument that it needs to burden someone's religion, or that perhaps it has a compelling reason for doing something that appears to be favoring one religion over another. Government can always has the opportunity to make that argument. But if government cannot make that argument, then usually what we say is, let the religious believers move forward with their practice. All of us will live and let live. and government can find another way to achieve its interest. So with that, I'd like to pause, Ahmed, and see if there are questions from people. If you have any questions for me, there's always more I can talk about. I never have, I'm trying to cover 2 years worth of material here in a half hour or so. But I'd like to see, what questions do you have? Are there any questions coming from viewers? And I'm happy to take whatever comes in.
Yeah, I'm not seeing right now any questions on our YouTube chat box, but I do want to let our viewers know that you can type up your questions and I'll try to ask the professor here. I had a couple of questions that came up in my mind, but I wanted to first start off with, and I want to make sure I'm getting the name right, but the First Amendment Center is called the Beck Laughlin First Amendment Center at the University of Texas.
Yes, and it's called and I, it's funny, Beck Laughlin. Nobody ever pronounces it right, but it's the Beck Laughlin First Amendment Center, and everyone, including myself, always pronounces it wrong. And let me just reiterate what you just said. I'd really encourage people, if they're watching on the YouTube channel, to type in questions they have. No question is offensive. No question is going to shock me. If something's on your mind, and no question is a dumb question, just fire it out there and let's all learn together. So yeah, the Beck Laughlin First Amendment Center. Yeah,
I wanted to ask how that came about. You're the founding director. I don't think there's many of its kind in the country. And probably not in Texas at least. So, how did they come about? Why University of Texas at Austin, and how that transition happened, how you came to found this center and the law and religion clinic within it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're right. There's only 4 law and religion clinics really across the country. It's Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Texas, and that's it. The First Amendment Center, what is unique about our clinic is that it is housed within the Beck Laughlin First Amendment Center. There is no other place like that anywhere in the United States. So it's unique by itself. So we have this great academic center in which to work on these cases that I mentioned, but also to promote scholarship and dialogue and conversations and debates about religious freedom, but also other First Amendment issues. Yeah. There are other places across the country that have First Amendment centers, but they all tend to completely ignore the religion clauses, which are 2 very important clauses in the First Amendment. You really need all of them working together for all the freedoms that we enjoy in the United States. So our center and clinic is the only one kind of working on the entire First Amendment all at once. And that's something that I'm really excited and proud about. And how it came to be is 2 University of Texas alums, Doug Beck and Sam Laughlin, agreed to provide an endowment for this center, provided that the University of Texas could find the right person to run it. And I'm just thankful that I was available and ready at the right time to be able to come here and do it, because it really has been wonderful. The students have just been incredible. The administration has been amazing. And I'm thankful to Beck and Laughlin for providing the funding to make it possible, because I think we can really do a lot of good.
Yeah. And how long has it been up and running?
So it's just launched this year. We are brand new. Everything is going just since really last May.
Wow. Congratulations again. And we do have now a couple of questions, so I'm going to go straight to the chat box. So one question is in 2 parts. How do you define religion, and can there be a religion that only one person believes in? And would that still have religious protections and freedoms under the Constitution?
Yeah, so good, excellent question. The question of how do you define religion has never been appropriately solved. I would say that law professors have probably written 50 articles on that for every one case that actually has to deal with it. And there's a reason for that. Generally speaking, people don't bring these types of claims, religious freedom claims, unless they really, really sincerely have religious beliefs. And so it often doesn't become a disputed question. It's not a question of, is this person really religious, and is this really a religious belief or practice? It just doesn't come up as often as you might think it would. And so courts haven't really had to solve that really difficult problem of how do we define religion. That said, it does come up on occasion. Every once in a while, courts do have to deal with it. And so they've come up with some tests. Some of the courts across the country will apply what's called a multi-factor test, and they'll consider a number of different factors, such as, is there a belief in a divine being or a supreme being? Are there practices or ordinances consistent with what we traditionally think of as, religious? Is this person showing the type of sincerity of behavior we would see from traditionally religious people? The Supreme Court has tried to come up with other tests. If it's somebody's belief or practice that holds in their place, that holds for them the same place that God might for other people, that might rise to the level of being a religious practice. So there are some tests, but there's no clear definitive test. And I think the main reason for that is simply that it's probably almost impossible to achieve, right? Every human philosophy cannot be considered religion for religious freedom purposes, but also we can't say nothing is religion. So we have to find something in between. And I'm just grateful that it doesn't come up that often. The second part of that question, though, can you have a religion of one? The answer is yes. That has actually been definitively stated by the Supreme Court. You can have your own religion. You can be part of another religion and have very different beliefs from everyone else in that religion. So for example, you could be, there was a very important case in the 1970s or maybe early 80s, I want to say, where a Jehovah's Witness refused to help build military machinery because he was a pacifist. Yeah. And the argument came up, well, other Jehovah's Witnesses are not pacifists, so that doesn't count as a religious belief. And the Supreme Court slapped that down. The Supreme Court said, it doesn't matter if other Jehovah's Witnesses are not pacifists. What matters is that for this man, for his faith and his religion, he is a pacifist, and therefore we're going to treat that with respect. So you can be a religion of one, you can be a dissenter within your own faith. Generally speaking, the courts are not going to dig into whether or not it's really a religion unless they really think that there might be a lack of sincerity. If I will say this, and I'll shut up and go for more questions. If a court thinks that someone is not being sincere, that they are using religion as a guise to try to get something else, generally speaking, the religious person will lose. The court might not base it, they might not explicitly say, we don't think you're being sincere or this isn't a religion, but some way or another, they'll find a way for the claimant to lose.
I see, yeah. Which is sometimes just the way it works. But we do have another question. Can the separation of church and state still allow religion to be discussed in public school?
Excellent question. So the Supreme Court has been very clear. Students do not shed their constitutional rights when they walk into the schoolhouse doors. So students have all the freedom in the world to talk about religion, to proselytize to one another, to say prayers, to read their scriptures, to do anything that they would want to do to live out their religious beliefs and traditions, and to be left alone if that's what they prefer. Where the Constitution comes into play, and this is the Establishment Clause. So remember, I talked about the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause doctrine limits how much school officials can push religion in schools. So students have basically all the freedom you might expect. Teachers and administrators have to be a little bit more careful. They can't push religion on the students. And the Supreme Court has been less than clear on what the test is for that. There was a period of time where they said schools cannot endorse any one religious belief. Then there's been other periods of time where they've said schools cannot coerce religion on any of the students. There's been other periods of time where they've come up with a 3-part test that's really confusing called the Lemon test, and it involves ensuring religion in schools aren't intertangled too much. That's where it gets really complicated. But the bottom line is administrators and teachers are limited by the Constitution. Students have as much freedom as they would like in school to be able to live out their faith and live out their religion. that make sense? Am I clear on that, Ahmed? I can't see these people in front of me when they ask questions, so you have to tell me if I'm not being clear.
No, I think it was clear. No, I think that answers the question. I do have a follow-up in that, like the curriculum at schools cover, I think, usually in social studies or history classes, world religions and things of that nature. So, how much of that comes into this discussion of establishment, or if one, like some minor religions, of course, don't get covered in the curriculum, or they only cover the major religions, but say they're leaving out one, or a religion wants its doctrines to be taught to students and things like that, to claim you can't establish, so why do you pick these 6 religions, and why can't my 7th religion or 8th religion be in there? Do you have any words regarding that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It really is. You can certainly talk about religion, right? What you can't do is push religion. And that question that you just asked is interesting. There's a case right now in California about that very question. It's a little bit different. The case in California, there's a Hindu group who is bothered because there's a social studies class in this particular school district where every year they teach about religion, and they teach about various world religions. And what they are teaching about Hinduism is basically wrong. And in this Hindu group's view, it's actually derogatory. It's making Hinduism sound bad. And so they are trying to challenge that. And I do think you have strong religious freedom arguments in that regard, to try to stop that. As to the question of, minor religions, that's interesting. I think it's a good argument. I think it's an argument that a particular religious group could bring. You could say, well, it's not fair that you're teaching about Christianity and Judaism, but you're not teaching about Islam. You should do that too. Or Islam is hardly a minority religion, but you get the idea. That's certainly a fair argument. I do think there would be a point where a school might be able to counter and say, well, there's only so much time in the day, and we can only cover so many religions, right? There's thousands of religions in the world. We can only cover so many of them. And so we've picked the 6 biggest. That might be something that a court would accept as legitimate. But I do think the argument from the religious groups is fair, and would get heard by a court. How it would get resolved, it's tough to say, but it's certainly a legitimate question and a legitimate claim.
What about the tax exemption of religious groups? Like, did that come up early on in the country's history, or was that a later development? I know income tax, becoming constitutional was in the 20th century, if I'm correct. But as soon as we started taxing income, was there an exemption for religious groups, or did that develop and someone had to fight for it? Because I think it comes also into the establishment clause type of argument, where you tax one group, but you don't tax another group, and they would have those arguments. So I don't know if you had any summary for us on that, history of taxation.
It's never really been controversial. And even though I hear some people clamor for it today, I don't think it'll ever really gain any steam. There's always been an exemption for taxes for faith-based groups, and quite frankly, other nonprofit charities as well.
Of course.
It's not as if it's only religious groups that are getting that. But the power to tax is the power to destroy, is one of the famous lines when we talk about tax exemptions. And tax exemptions for churches, it's essentially one way to ensure government stays out of churches and is not entangled in churches. I can't even imagine what a mess it would be if you took away the tax exemptions for churches and suddenly you have governments digging into all the donations that are being made and all the finances and how the churches are using them, and then having to come up with complex schemes for deductions and various tax credits. It would intermingle church and state in a way that would cause far more problems than it would solve. And so generally, it's just been kind of a widespread agreement that, look, churches get their tax exemptions.
Yeah.
And other nonprofits, I'll emphasize that.
I guess it might have been something that was just accepted from even maybe before the Constitution?
I don't know if it was that early. I don't know if it was that soon, but certainly it's been in the history of the United States been something that's never really been controversial.
Okay.
The only time I ever hear it brought up now is when somebody gets upset about something one church is doing, and then they get really mad and they say churches should not get tax exemptions. But that's almost always the Puritan mistake, because I hear it from both sides. I'll hear the political right do it when they see a church. So for example, I heard a lot of clamoring about that from the political right when various churches were offering sanctuary to immigrants who were in the country without documentation. So the sanctuary churches, they would offer sanctuary to immigrants, and people from the political right were screaming, churches should not get their tax exemptions. This is awful. And then when you'd see other churches taking positions on other controversial issues, like say related to abortion or something, you'd have people on the political left screaming, churches should not get their tax exemptions. This is awful. Well, all of that is the Puritan mistake playing out, right? Somebody's doing something with their religious beliefs that I disagree with, therefore we should tax them out of existence, is kind of the argument that's being made. Aside from that, I never really see it get taken seriously by anybody.
Okay. I guess we have time for just one more question, and I don't want to keep you all night, of course. But we do have 2 questions on the board.
We can do 2 more. I'm okay.
Okay.
You're the boss.
I mean, one of them I think is a harder question, but I'll ask both in reverse order. The talking about religious freedoms has positive connotations for most people, but not always for others, especially people in the majority religion. And I guess how do we work for religious freedoms without causing anxiety in the people in the majority religion, where they think, you know, their majority status is being threatened, or that, you know, these minority religions that they don't, you know, they don't agree with are popping up and having a lot of freedoms.
You know, it's interesting though. I mean, in the United States, Protestant Christians have been in the majority through most of our country's history.
Yeah.
And it is true that as religious freedom has been applied throughout our country's history, the people who have benefited mostly from it have been minority religious groups who are not Protestant Christians. But over the last 20 years or so, many of the most significant religious freedom challenges have actually been against Protestant Christians. And they are the ones that are now having to bring claims as other groups start to get more power, especially secular groups and secular humanists start to get more power. And then they want to oppress the Protestant Christians one way or another. The Protestant Christians are using religious freedom. So I guess I would say, if you're in the majority group, you do not need to be afraid of religious freedom. It shouldn't be causing you anxiety. You should be happy to promote the religious freedom and protections for other people, knowing that one day those very same protections are likely going to come back and protect you. And that is what's happening in our country right now.
Yeah. And then the final question, I guess, is how are religious groups protected under Affordable Care Act?
So the Affordable Care Act, that's a really probably way more than what we could cover.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was thinking, I didn't know how much we could go into.
But let me just give a very brief summary answer, and then of course we could have a whole semester talking about that question. The bottom line is, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, the Obama administration tried to do as much as it could to protect the religious interests of various groups, and especially religious, especially churches in particular. That said, some of what the Obama administration did not satisfy certain religious groups. It wasn't enough for certain religious groups to protect what they considered their free exercise of religion. So they had to bring lawsuits challenging certain provisions of the Affordable Care Act. And those lawsuits are the ones like the Little Sisters of the Poor that you've probably heard about, that the Little Sisters of the Poor cases have gone up to the Supreme Court and back down and up again multiple times. A lot of those had to do with the contraception mandate. But by and large, I think the Obama administration tried to do their best to exempt out institutions like the Little Sisters of the Poor and to give them protections. And then the Supreme Court since then has had to work out the kinks and try to ensure that some of these groups still got the protections that they needed. And I think by and large, that is working out. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the new Biden administration if more of those conflicts come up. But there's no question that the Affordable Care Act resulted in a whole bunch of litigation over a now 6-year period, 8-year period now, I guess, involving religious freedom against some of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act. It created almost like an anomaly out there because generally speaking, you don't have a lot of litigation against the federal government when it comes to religious liberty. But when the Affordable Care Act was passed, it posed a lot of problems for faith-based groups, especially because of the contraception mandate, if they had a problem providing certain types of contraception to people and they were being forced to do so.
I see, due to their religious beliefs.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. Before I let you go, I did want to, so the examples of cases you gave us, those are the type of cases that the Law and Religion Clinic helps religious groups with, or I mean, are these actual cases from that you're working on with your team? And if groups have, you know, those types of problems, how can they contact you? What's the intake process?
Excellent question. Yeah, those are all live cases that we are working on right now. And so basically I would say, and I really want to get the word out there about our clinic. Our legal services that we provide are all free. So anybody can call us up or send an email and see if we can't help. But what I would say is, if you're ever facing any discrimination because of your religion, including atheists and agnostics, give me a call, send me an email. If you are a church or a religious group or a faith-based charity and you're just trying to navigate something and you have a legal question, give me a call. If we can help, we will. If you're someone whose religious exercise is being burdened, come give us a call, talk to us. If you're involved seeing a problem at a school involving religion, either the school is pushing one particular religion or they're preventing students from being able to practice their faith, I'd love to hear from you. How can you do that? The best way to do that would be to just Google the University of Texas Law and Religion Clinic or Google my name, and my contact information will appear on the center's website, and you can just shoot me an email or give me a call. And from there, we have a way of deciding which cases we can take on. We eventually, since we're doing all of this for free, we only have so much ability to take on so many cases, but I certainly would want to hear from everybody. If we can't help you because we just lack the bandwidth, then what we'll try to do is refer you to someone who potentially can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor. And I do you pronounce your name Collis or Collis?
Collis, you hit it out of the park first try, which most people don't do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Collis. Again, founding director of Beck and Laughlin First Amendment Center and the Law and Religion Clinic at the University of Texas at Austin Law School. And we thank you very much for spending your evening with us and enlightening us on the religious liberties in the country, and hope to see you again in future Dialogue Matters events.
Great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.